Okay, thank you so much for being here. On behalf of Jews Against Islamophobia, which is a coalition of Jewish Voice for Peace, Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and Jews Say No, I'd like to welcome you to our panel, Challenging Islamophobia. Please give a warm welcome for Debbie.
Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you, Jews Against Islamophobia, for organizing this amazing panel tonight. The first person that will be speaking on the panel is Amna Akbar, attorney in residence, adjunct professor of law in the Creating Law Enforcement Accountability and Responsibility Project at CUNY.
Okay, so I'm sure many of you have been following the stories about the NYPD's surveillance program, their demographics unit, how they've been collecting information on mosques and businesses across the city and in the tri-state area, MSAs from University of Pennsylvania to all the CUNY schools, etc. That they're creating this kind of demographics information, that they're collecting information on the types of speeches that are being given in the mosque, etc. So that's a big part of kind of what you consume in the daily news these days. Another thing that's in the news all the time, every week, multiple times a week sometimes, are these terrorism prosecutions, right? And when you take a look at the facts, even in the fairly uncritical mainstream coverage, you'll notice a lot of times that the type of facts that people are being prosecuted for seem fairly trivial. So someone sends $400 to Pakistan, for example, and the government is prosecuting them for material support of terrorism. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how to make sense of the NYPD surveillance program and all of these terrorism prosecutions that, like I said, most of which, when you look at the facts, are criminalizing fairly trivial behavior. Just so that you have a larger framework through which to understand why the government is doing this and what the problems with their larger thinking and larger approach on these issues is. So after 9/11, there was a tremendous amount of pressure on the government that because terrorism is such a unique type of crime, which is to say, may not happen very often, but when it does, the consequences can be tremendous, that the government should be it should change its model of law enforcement, that it should be preventing terrorism before it happens. This is very different than what typical law enforcement does, because typically law enforcement is either concerned with crime that's already been committed, or it's concerned with crimes that are about to happen. But instead, this idea came up and took hold, especially in the FBI and the NYPD, that the government should be preventing terrorism. But to prevent terrorism, you need a theory on which to predict future terrorism, right? Because the government needs some sort of way to say, okay, here are the things that we think we're going to predict terrorism, and therefore, now that we're preventing terrorism, we're going to focus on identifying these factors out in the world in order to figure out where we should be focusing our efforts. And the theory that the government has been relying on to prevent terrorism is this idea called radicalization. Now in the news, this term is used all the time. You'll hear about radicalized Muslims, radicalization, radical Muslim. You'll feel people being asked on the news, are they radical Muslims? And if you're paying attention, you'll notice that it's a fairly diffuse term. It's pretty unclear what it means or what it entails, but basically it's used in this kind of broad-based way to mark people in a way that these people have ideologies that we think are dangerous and that we don't like, and therefore we should be suspicious of them. But more specifically, the government uses this idea of radicalization to say, we have a theory on which to predict the way that a Muslim goes from being like a regular old Muslim to a terrorist. And you should read this document where it was primarily articulated. So this theory was articulated by the NYPD in a report that they published in 2007 called Radicalization in the West, the Homegrown Threat. And in that report, the NYPD theorized that there were 4 stages of radicalization. The first stage is pre-radicalization. And the fourth stage stage is jihadization, and in the middle there are a couple of other stages. But the important thing to know about this report, and it's laughable when you read it, but it's scary also because it's really taken hold with the NYPD and the FBI as a basis on which to police Muslim communities and beyond in some ways, is that the first 3 stages of radicalization, the report goes through and identifies a number of factors that they say are associated with radicalization. And the factors are very broad. So, for example, they'll identify places where Muslim men ages from 15 to 35 gather, hookah bars, mosques, that kind of thing. So it identifies whole geographical areas that are interesting if you're interested in radicalization. It also identifies certain behaviors that they're interested in. Behaviors that would indicate that someone is in the pre-radicalization stage, for example, are people who are, or in the second stage, are people who grow a beard, people who start to pray more regularly, people who are concerned about paying interest, who pay off their mortgage because they no longer want to pay interest because of the Islamic prohibition on paying certain types of interest. So all of these things, which are basic tenets of Muslim religious practice, become criminalized as part of the process of radicalization. Equally concerning is that when you go further along this theory, as the NYPD has articulated it, if a Muslim starts to become politicized, like so for example, if a Muslim starts to articulate concern that the United States is increasing its number of drone attacks in Pakistan and Yemen, and is on the streets about that, that's another sign of radicalization. Once you get to the politicization of your beliefs and your identity in that way, you're already in the 3rd stage of radicalization according to the report. And it's not until the 4th stage, the jihadization stage, that the report is concerned at all with any kind of plans to commit an actual crime. So the first 3 stages are, like I said, totally focused on behavior absolutely unrelated to crime and focused on Muslim religious practice, Muslim associational practices, political beliefs that are critical of the government and that are associated with Muslim communities, like criticism of American foreign policy. So the theory, folks have been laughing and it is funny, but the theory has become, if you start to pay attention now, you'll notice the way that people talk about terrorism and counterterrorism in the United States. The theory is really the main way that the US government is thinking about what it's doing in terms of terrorism and counterterrorism. And so the FBI and the NYPD are largely no longer policing terrorism in this country. What they're policing is radicalization. Even if you look at, for example, the big high-profile terrorism prosecutions where they allege that there actually was some sort of plot, there are a couple of those, but most of the ones, if you look closer at the facts, you'll notice that the plot was something that was instigated by a government informant. And I know that this is a well-educated group on these issues, so you're probably familiar with these cases. I brought a couple of copies of a report called Targeted and Entrapped that I prepared at my old job with students I was working with that talks about some of those cases, and you should check it out either here or online if you haven't seen it. But it documents a number of cases where the government informant was literally trolling Muslim communities, encouraging people that Islam mandates Muslims to undertake violent acts, and then encouraging people, drawing on their vulnerabilities like their poverty, for example, or their low IQ, to encourage them to commit some sort of plan that the informant came up with, that the informant provided the weapons for, that kind of thing. Now, the reason why this is related to what I was saying about radicalization is both because I want to make clear that, like I was saying, most of the terrorism prosecutions do criminalize fairly trivial behavior. There are higher profile cases, but a lot of them have this question about the role of the informant. But also because the basis on which the government is sending informants into Muslim communities en masse, like the NYPD, is because of the radicalization theory. So partly it's because the radicalization theory, if you take it seriously the way that the government does, then it encourages massive information gathering on Muslim communities. Because now, who's growing a beard, what kind of Friday sermons are being given, who's protesting drone strikes, all these types of things become relevant to the government's policing of terrorism because it's associated with radicalization, which the government believes is a reliable way to predict who's going to become a terrorist in the future. But the other reason I'm mentioning it is because when you think about, the government has never exactly come out and said this, but when you think about their practices, sending informants into Muslim communities and encouraging people to commit terrorist plots, they're really doing that, it seems to me, under this strong commitment to the radicalization theory. Because under the theory, it suggests that once someone is going forward, they may not stop. And so the government's theory is that let's get some informants in the community and push people. And if we're able to push people, then we're going to get there anyways, because that's what our theory says. And therefore, by seeing how far we can push people, seeing what we can get them to agree to, even if it means offering them hundreds of thousands of dollars when, for example, in the context of the Newburgh 4, you're talking about ex-cons who are unemployed and have a lot of poverty issues. They think that they're doing that in order to protect national security in our communities. So, I think am I out of time? Okay, so I guess the last thing that I will say is that, the AP story, Cyrus is going to talk more about the program, the NYPD program, but the Associated Press stories have focused on the NYPD's covert surveillance practices, so sending in of informants, undercover cops, internet surveillance, that kind of thing. But alongside that, there's a whole other part of the picture that hasn't really gotten picked up as much in the mainstream coverage or the Associated Press coverage anyways, which is that while the government on the one hand is doing all this covert surveillance, they are also doing, FBI and NYPD are doing hundreds and hundreds of voluntary interviews with Muslim communities in New York and across the country. So those are the interviews I was describing in the beginning, where we provide, in the context of which we provide legal services to people, where they're knocking on doors, they're asking people to answer a couple of questions. And even though I'm happy to report that, because of the work of people on this table, people in Muslim communities are learning that they don't have an obligation to talk, that it is indeed a voluntary interview, even if they try to convince you that it's not. People enter into these risky situations not knowing that they have the right to refuse. And the other part of this process that happens with the voluntary interview process is that the government is also aggressively using the information that they gather in order to recruit informants within the community. So for example, if they have someone in a mosque and they find out, oh, Amna's undocumented, now this becomes a leverage point for them to send someone after me to try to cultivate me as an informant and say, hey, we know you're undocumented, we're thinking about potentially deporting you, but if you work with us and start sharing information on your community members, we can take care of you. So just to say that, the Associated Press stories have done a great job documenting a lot of aspects of this program, but there are other things that are going on at the same time, all under this premise of policing terrorism, which is ultimately, as our experience bears out, is policing radicalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Amna. It's really interesting as we sit here and listen to this 10 years later. Some people think that things may have changed, but interestingly enough, things have not changed, and they've actually gotten worse. As I'm sitting here and listening to you talk and actually use some of the jargon, the radicalization and pre-radicalization, I couldn't help but think of Murray Edelman, who developed the theory constructing political spectacle, and he talked about the language that's used, and what he refers to it as symbolic language, which people could not really identify or understand or be able to debunk because of the way that it's used. And so, as you'll see tonight, many of this jargon will be used, which really means nothing to the average person except create fear and hate-mongering, unfortunately. So next we have Cyrus McGoldrick, who is a civil rights manager at the Council on American Islamic Relations.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. Greet you with peace, shalom, and as we like to say, assalamu alaikum. To begin, I will introduce the work and the organization and then pick up where Amna left off. I work at the New York chapter of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. We are a national Muslim civil rights organization, and with 35 chapters around the country, one based in DC. Here in New York, we are certainly one of the busiest offices. Unfortunately, for one of the most diverse cities in the world, we have somehow become the epicenter of so much institutionalized Islamophobia. It's really unbelievable, but we're doing the best that we can, really through the work of coalitions like these. the work, certainly we try to solve cases of religious discrimination, helping people who are discriminated against at their workplace, in schools, and jobs, and by law enforcement, and this certainly is part of it. We're working on policy, improving policies and implementing them, as well as community education, which is so important. This work, to pick up where Amna left off, to hear theories like this, they're extremely concerning, I think, not just to Muslims and not just to civil rights advocates, but to anyone, any person of faith, or to any person of politics. Certainly to hear things like the signifiers of radicalization being praying, going to mosques, frequenting bookstores, growing a beard, quitting smoking, starting to dress better. It's very concerning because I fit all of those qualifications. So it's almost no surprise then, to hear this, for this document to be public, and it is. You can absolutely go and find it yourself. These things are really in this report. This is being presented as law enforcement theory. It was really no surprise then when about 2 years ago we started hearing reports that an anti-Muslim hate film called The Third Jihad was being used in the NYPD counterterrorism training. A long battle, media battle ensued with the police department where they denied. They got caught lying. Rather than being shown one time, it turns out it was shown to 1,500 police officers over at least a 3-month period. That, however, this film, also I hate advertising for it, but that also you can find for yourself online. It's on YouTube, absolutely. This film really puts all Muslims on a scale from, at best, manipulative, and at worst, terrorists in waiting. It's narrated by a man who calls himself a devout Muslim and who has really become a puppet for a lot of that right-wing rhetoric. Very concerning. But this is almost a very small issue, I think, compared to the story that we're really here to discuss. This really lays the groundwork, and unfortunately, it was no surprise then when back in August we first saw reports from the Associated Press detailing a program called the Demographics Unit. The Demographics Unit. These documents, these NYPD Intelligence Division documents, were made available to the Associated Press and to Len Levitt and a few other journalists and lawyers who started detailing, doing interviews, doing background research into this program. The Demographics Unit, I think, is one of the most crucial documents in all of these reports, and it's one that's certainly not very much discussed anymore because it's very inconvenient. It's a PowerPoint presentation detailing this unit within the police department, which is completely separate from police work. I think this is very important to say because no one here is anti-law enforcement. As Linda said one time, we're anti-law enforcement misconduct. The police work, we all here pay our taxes and we need them to protect us. And just like everyone else, we need them to look for evidence, look for crime, find criminals. That's what they're here to do. We expect them to do their job well. It's a very difficult job. This unit, however, was something entirely different. As Amna was saying, this is about intelligence gathering, finding information, mapping communities, and very often worse. Finding the weak spots often within communities, finding the most vulnerable members, and manufacturing headlines out of it. This demographics unit and certain other parts of this intelligence division were engaged in just comprehensive and warrantless surveillance. If there were any doubt that this were ethnic profiling, there is a slide. There is a slide on the PowerPoint presentation called, and I quote, "Ancestries of Interest." I couldn't even make it up if I tried. It's like, honestly, this report is like cliched fiction if we didn't have the documents for it. There are 29 ancestries of interest on this page. 28 of them are countries with large Muslim populations. The 29th is, I quote, "American Black Muslim." These were the 29 ancestries of interest that police were tasked to follow, to map across the city's neighborhoods and beyond. Not only were they here in New York, in fact, the reason that the story broke was because local police in New Brunswick were responding to a call by a landlord that thought that he had stumbled across a terrorist cell. The local police went into the apartment, and who did they find? NYPD officers installing wiretaps on another tenant. I think they were a little bit offended because they didn't hear about this, and so this made it to the press and led to this investigation, which interviewed, at least in the first report, over 40 agents from the NYPD, from the CIA, from the FBI. This program was set up by a former CIA official. We can debate whether or not that's former, but that's another story entirely. And also a current CIA agent who was placed at the police department and who recently actually was recalled. I think, not to pat ourselves on the back, but I think the CIA realized that there was no oversight over this, that it is illegal for them to be spying domestically. They have no mandate to operate here, and so they actually took the agent back to Virginia. So certainly one step in the right direction. This program not only surveilled mosques, which certainly is bad enough, but schools, right from colleges, college student groups, right down to Muslim elementary schools, to Muslim-owned businesses, certainly what they called ethnic hotspots, which included, your hookah bars, tea shops, coffee shops, bookstores, things of this nature. All of these were placed on maps, not just in New York City, mind you, but everywhere from Long Island to New Jersey to Pennsylvania to upstate New York, Connecticut. Every report that comes out, it just keeps getting worse. There's so much to it, there's so much detail to it. It started with one report, and now it's, I think, over 30 Associated Press reports that have come out. Certainly, I think at the beginning, certain groups thought they were safe, and then another report comes out targeting them, everywhere from Moroccans to Syrians to, in fact, Shia, which is a whole sect of Islam that a report was filed on them. It's very disturbing to see this information come out. Certainly, it is somewhat of a vindication, I think, to see that these documents prove this, and it certainly gives us some place to work from. So we certainly have to count our blessings. But at the same time, it's very disturbing to find that this is actually happening, and this was a matter of policy. Not just rogue agents getting out of line and trampling on civil liberties, but a matter of policy. I have to say that the spying is certainly bad enough. I don't think there's really much question about that. Spying is absolutely bad enough. Spying on people based on their religion, their politics, with no evidence of crime being committed whatsoever, it must be illegal. This really harkens back to very dark days, not just in American history, but human history. The connection, though, I think the intersection of this program with certain other powers of government that Amna referenced is especially disturbing to us. Because the other day, just last week or 2 weeks ago, another report came out that some of you may have seen. It was another Associated Press report showing that not only were the police spying on Muslims, but they were treating liberal protest groups like Muslims. They were spying on any protest groups, not even, honestly, some of them were pretty safe too. They weren't even, I wouldn't even call them leftists. They were pretty tame groups out there who were planning, nothing wrong with being leftists if there's any leftists in the room. We're all in this together. But any group that in any way was planning a protest, they knew what they were doing, and they infiltrated these groups, compiled reports on them as well. So the spying is certainly bad enough, but the use of informants and the employment of informants, the manipulation of informants, the entrapment cases, which amounts to the manufacture of crimes. Now we have the laws on the books now that they can detain any of us indefinitely. I hope everyone knows that. The National Defense Authorization Act is on the books. They can detain even American citizens, which I hope shouldn't really even be a distinction, but even American citizens can be detained indefinitely by the military without charge. We have precedent of American citizens being tortured through solitary confinement and sometimes worse. And finally, people being convicted of crimes with no physical evidence of a crime being committed whatsoever. It's really amazing. Everything that our country and many of us criticize other countries for doing, our own government is now doing on our tax dollar. Really only a matter of scale. The difference is only a matter of scale, I believe. Very concerning. And I think, especially when you see the expansion of these programs to be not just Muslims, but to all groups, I think it's very clear that this is not about keeping us safe. All research, all counterterrorism research, the many experts who study this, everyone from Robert Pape to John Esposito and everyone in between who has studied this in detail, shows that this does not keep us safe. This is not how you catch terrorists. The very few terrorists who actually came up with these things by themselves, this is not how they were caught. You look for criminality, and that's what's the most important thing. This is really about control. It's about criminalizing dissent and finding out what people are thinking, what are they doing, what are they saying. And this is very disturbing for all of us, I believe. Because, honestly, yesterday it was someone else. We have a long and dark history. Every group that has come to this country has gone through this in some respect. Some still are. So really, it's through these coalitions, through us understanding a shared history and hopefully a shared future, that we'll really be able to move forward and really make sure that our government is answering to us. I think that's something that we can all get behind as Americans and as people who came to this country. and people who were born and raised in this country, as many of us were as well. So with that, I don't want to lecture much longer. I certainly want to hear your questions and comments, and I look forward to that discussion as well. If I haven't met you yet, I look forward to doing so soon. Thank you to everyone from the panel and from the organizers, and I look forward to talking to you.
Thank you, Cyrus. So next we have Linda Sarsour, representative of the Muslim American Civil Liberties Coalition and the director of the Arab American Association of New York. Linda.
First of all, thank you for having me here. And as Cyrus said, I am also someone that gets plenty of hate mail and hate tweets, which are my favorite because they're so concise, you know. And it's just heartwarming for me to always be in a space where I feel some hospitality and I feel love and I feel included and I feel like I'm amongst family. So thank you for having me. What I wanted to share was, I'll tell you a little bit about my organization. So I'm the executive director at the Arab American Association of New York, which is a social service and advocacy organization located in Southwest Brooklyn, which is home to the largest Arab American community in the state of New York. There are about 35,000 Arabs that live in that area. I'm also part of the Muslim American Civil Liberties Coalition, which is a coalition that started in 2007 actually to look at this report that was described here and provide some suggestions and amendments to this report. And that's kind of how this coalition came together, predominantly Muslim American groups, but also organizations and civil rights groups, like, for example, the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU, as well as the Clear Project and others. So just listening, first of all, I'm depressed. I just get re-traumatized every time I'm on these panels. And I think that people don't really think about how this really affects people on the ground, like the everyday person that's living in these communities. And I want to share with you a story, and this is my expertise, is that I get to be with the community every day. I get to walk the streets and shop at stores and sit in circles at the mosque and talk to women, and my organization is a multi-service agency, so we have adult education programs. So I like to chat with people and to see how they're feeling about things. So in 2010, and obviously people know 2010 was the big, Park 51, the Ground Zero mosque controversy. And we have a summer camp, and we have at the end of summer camp we do a summer camp celebration where we invite the parents and the siblings, and we just have one big party. So I was standing in a corner with a couple of little kids, and my son was one of them. And one of the kids was in 5th grade, so he's going to junior high school, right? So he's all anxious, and I'm like, yeah, this is normal. Like, kids are anxious; they're going to junior high school now. When you go to junior high school, you're supposed to be worried about being a freshman, and you're not going to be cool, and are the big kids gonna whatever. Anyway, so this kid asked me a question. He says, he was like, sister, when I go to school, if they ask me if I'm Muslim, what am I gonna do? And I was like, what? I was like, you are gonna tell them you're Muslim and you're proud of it, right? So I'm trying to get, I didn't get it, right? So he was like, well, what about if they hurt me? And I was like, what do you mean they're gonna hurt you? I was like, they're not gonna hurt you. So he was like, what about that guy, the taxi cab driver, right? The guy asked him if he was Muslim, and then he sliced him. And I thought to myself, wow. And then all of a sudden, these kids got into this conversation. And my own son, in that particular moment, says to me, Mom, why do they hate us? What did we do? And for me to have to stand there in front of 4 kids between the ages of 9 to 13 and have to answer a question like, why do they hate us, right? So I said, nobody hates you. There are people who don't understand you and who you are. So you have to always take the opportunity to tell people about who you are, right? So the psyche of the community, right? It's not just the people or the community it's people's individuals in the community that are being affected. And what's so sad about it is you're hearing about all these government policies, which is one whole other thing. But the fact that it's being implemented by citizens, right? So because our government is doing this, it's okay for me to be bigoted against a particular group. So I'll give you another local example. Last summer, July 4th, picnic time, right? We saw a flyer in the community in Bay Ridge, and the flyer said Independence Day celebration, picnic in Shore Road Park. So my board chair, 65-year-old retired OBGYN doctor, has delivered over 5,000 babies in that neighborhood. He's he's Bay Ridge, like he's lived there for 40 years. Brings me the flyer and he's like, Linda, why are we not a part of this event? Why are we not co-sponsors? I was like, I don't know. I was like, I don't look at every, whatever. So I said, look, you go find out who these co-sponsors are and you go do your thing and we'll co-sponsor. So he goes and finds out who the person is and he goes from one person to the next and he ends up getting to the organizer. So my board chair, an eloquent, he's a professional person, a doctor, says to him, we'd love to sponsor this event, if that includes, we have to provide some financial support, maybe we could have a performance from our community, whatever it is. So the guy says to my board chair, he says, I don't think you understand what this event is. And my board chair was like, excuse me? Independence Day, July, he's like, I know what this event is. He's like, no, this is an American holiday. Right? He's like, we don't have ethnic groups that sponsor these types of events. I was like, excuse me? Anyway, if you look at the performances, because they have the bands now, they have like some Irish, and I'm like, really? So anyway, so my board chair comes back to me and I said, okay, 2 o'clock press conference, right there in front of this guy's office. So my board chair was like, no, Linda, we don't want to create more animosity, and all this stuff. And I was like, all right, because I'm quite dramatic, right? So I was having a heart attack. Anyway, so to make a long story short, we have a festival, the Bay Ridge Arab American Bazaar. It's huge, it's in a park, we have live stage, live music. At that event, a reporter came up to me and said, hey, I heard that you guys got banned from this July 4th event. So I said, listen, my board doesn't want to talk. But if you go talk to them and they talk, I'll talk. So they went and interviewed these organizers. And listen, you could be a bigot if you want, but usually people are not overtly bigoted, right? It's kind of their own thing. These guys were quoted in the Brooklyn paper. You can look it up online. Actually, the article is called Banned on the 4th of July, if you want to look it up. And they actually said things like this in my own community, where we are actually, if you came to Bay Ridge, you will see that. In the area that's the most highly concentrated area, every single business is open. Every time we see a closed business, a closed door, boom, we open it. We don't care what it is. We'll open flooring, we'll open cafes, we'll open laundromats, we'll open anything. We actually are helping boost the economy in that area, right? A lot of older residents, it's what we call a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community, and we're actually bringing this next generation of people to rebuild that community. So what they said were things like, well, if they want to come to the event, they can come, but they have to hang their ethnicity at the door. This is quote unquote in the newspaper, you can read it. And depicting our community as a community that is, our response was like, in this community, there are Norwegian Americans, Italian Americans, Greek Americans, that we are also American, right? And we will not hang our ethnicity at the door because who we are Arab Americans, just like everybody else is from somewhere else, right? So we seem the most rational in that particular situation. And the other issue also is, when we're sitting in our community, we're having these local discussions, right? And we're listening, for example, to presidential hopefuls on every channel, right? I don't usually watch them, but I'm on Twitter and everybody's like tweeting about it, so I end up finding out what they said. And when you have people that want to be the president of your country say things like, for example, my kids were playing on the laptop and I'm watching one of the debates, and when someone says Palestinians. Oh yeah, they're the invented people. Nobody started saying Palestinians until like the 1970s. I was like, what are you talking about? And then my kids asked me, they're like, what do they mean Palestinians are invented people? And I'm like, I don't even want to explain this to you. Like, you're a Palestinian, that's it. Just take that and get out of here. And these kind of discussions are hard discussions for family members to have with their children, right? So it's enough that we have this intergenerational issue with these American-born, first, second, third generation who are trying to be a part of, be like every other kid, and then have to have this cultural, traditional families and people trying to figure out how to live in the United States. But the psyche is really, in the community, people are really traumatized, right? They don't see the friends. And what's so interesting is that even people like me, who are, I can defend myself quite well, I speak English really well. People don't think that I can defend myself, right? So last story that I'll share with you is, I'm at the supermarket and I'm telling this woman, excuse me, she's not, paying me any mind. So I kind of slid by her a little bit. And her daughter comes, she was a kind of an older woman. I slid by her, I was very careful, and her daughter came, and what she basically was like, listen to me here, you don't own this community, okay? And I don't know, and people need to go back to your country. And I really wholeheartedly thought that she didn't think I spoke English. So I said, excuse me? I know you're not talking to me, right? So her mother got really like shaken up and she was like, telling her daughter like to relax, and her daughter, and her daughter got into it. But the interesting thing was, she said to her, you don't own this supermarket. I said, well, some Palestinians do, you know that? So, I mean, the fact that people don't even know the environment that they live in. So, moving forward, I think that some of the work that we're doing quickly is, sometimes you have to build within your community before you take your community out and get them to like talk to other communities. So some of the things that we've been doing is having conversations about our community from a place of self-worth and dignity, right? We're not begging for rights. We're not begging to be treated right. We deserve that, right? And that's a place that we don't always talk from. We're always talking from the defensive. I don't need to defend myself, right? And also with talking to young people, right? And telling people, like our young people, by the way, I'm very proud and very optimistic about our future. Our young people don't care, right? They're American. I have kids that say to me, they can't deport me anywhere because I was born here and I only have an American passport. I was like, yeah, me too. That we're on the same boat together. That's why I'm extra spicy. But I hope that we get to this later on. But thinking about ways that people can be involved in the work that they do. First of all, you are all welcome to come volunteer at any of our organizations. We are always looking for people to volunteer. English, we need English teachers over here at Bay Ridge, English teachers. But also following the work that we do so that you know when to plug in, particularly on this NYPD issue that was brought up here. So my last plug is I always plug myself on everything. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's my first initial and my last name, very simple, El Sarsour. I tweet about everything. People think, my mom thinks I run my mouth and tweet for a living, which I totally don't do, but maybe I do. So just follow me on Twitter so you can keep kind of up to date. We live tweet our press conferences, events that we're at, panel discussions, etc. So that kind of keeps people articles. If you're interested in all this NYPD stuff, if you go to Twitter and you don't have to be an active tweeter, but if you go to Twitter and you put in the hashtag WTF NYPD, isn't that like perfect? WTF NYPD, you will read every single article that has come out across the world about this NYPD issue and other issues that are related to law enforcement. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda. You are a woman of many talents, I must say. And so now I'm going to move on to our next person, which I'm really delighted to introduce, who will be speaking on behalf of the Muslim youth. And I hope that we will learn much more. Kinat Zaman is a Hunter College student. She created a Muslim youth group, Muslims in Action, with friends in Staten Island. Kinat also worked with Student Press Initiative to interview New York City students about their experiences post 9/11. She is a youth member of Khadijah's Caravan, an organization that promotes spiritually based activism through art, education, and entrepreneurship. Without further ado.
Hello everyone. I would like to thank everyone for inviting me today, especially Debbie and Mumita. The organization that I'm representing today is Khadijah's Caravan, a workshop that was created after 9/11 to give Muslim youth a voice. And the second borough that they came to was Staten Island. And I was really grateful that they came to Staten Island because many times Staten Island is the forgotten borough and we're the last borough to get resources. So Mumita came to Staten Island at my request. And Khadijah's Caravan definitely opened up my eyes to a lot of issues that are on Staten Island. But one of the most tangible issues was that Islamophobia is very prevalent in Staten Island. And I knew that Islamophobia existed. I just did not know to what extent it existed. And I found this out the year that MAS, Muslims in American Society, had wanted to come and build a community center in Staten Island. And one of the cons of living in Staten Island is that because we don't get a lot of resources, we're also one of the boroughs that get forgotten when it comes to Muslim organizations. A lot of people tend to forget that there's also Muslims that live on Staten Island. And a lot of time, so Khadijah's Caravan brought awareness to that for me when we had a workshop series one day where we had to identify ourselves within our community space. And it was during that time that I wanted to identify myself as an islander, a Muslim islander, and I felt like a person who lives on Staten Island, but I didn't think my neighbors saw me as a fellow islander. I think they just saw me as a Muslim. And it was at that time that I felt really confused because the whole controversy about the community center being built was going on. And I remember at that meeting where I attended during the questionnaire session, there was a lot of hate going on during the meeting where people were saying that Muslims should go back to where they came from, that MAS is a terrorist organization. And a lot of the people that were there were also of the older demographic age. So I'm not saying that, hate is justified, but I understand that sometimes people weren't exposed to diverse environments. It was during this time that I really felt that the Muslim youth's voice was being ignored, because at that time, my friends and I had created a Muslim youth group for young Muslim girls on Staten Island as a space to sort of talk about the issues that they face on a daily basis and to give them a safe space. However, after a few meetings, we realized that there were no resources available for young Muslim boys on Staten Island, and we took them under our wing, making it a co-ed Muslim youth group. However, we soon realized that it was necessary that the girls return to their own separate space and the men have their own the boys have their separate space, so they could speak openly and comfortably about issues that they face. And we realized that MAS, Muslims in American Society, was going to be the tool that would give boys a youth group where they could feel comfortable speaking about whatever problems they face on a daily basis as Muslim Americans, because unfortunately the two identities do conflict for both Muslim girls and boys. So it was during that time when Khadija's Caravan told us to explore our space, ourselves and our communities, that I really felt like I was a Muslim and I didn't really feel like an American, because I felt that our civil rights were were put on the shelf and we didn't have the right to build a community center right where it was very necessary. And I felt as though the public ignored the youth's voice in the sense that they forgot that a lot of our youth today are confused and they do need guidance, and they forgot that we really need that resource at that time. Eventually MAS did get built, and it was said that we came in through the back door, so that wasn't a very nice comment, I guess, but it was definitely something that opened our eyes to the way Staten Islanders viewed Muslims. Khadija's Caravan also opened my eyes to, I guess, other aspects that made me uncomfortable as a Muslim in general. We went to two conferences, South Asian American leaders, South Asian Americans Leading Together, which is known as SALT, and we also attended a conference held by the Allied Media Conference. And at both of these conferences, there were a lot of LGBT groups. And I remember never really being exposed to those groups and also feeling very uncomfortable and trepidatious when I went to the conferences. But after a few workshops, I began to realize that LGBT groups and Muslims face many of the same issues where we feel that our civil rights are being violated, and we also feel as though we don't have a right to an identity, where people feel that they can give our stories their own voice and their own perspective, and we ourselves can't represent ourselves because no one is giving us that opportunity. However, after attending those conferences, I did begin to realize that we are more similar than we think, and that we are fighting the same battles. And it was through Khadija's Caravan that I was able to become more comfortable with these issues and also grow as a person. So for that, I'm always thankful that Khadija's Caravan gave us a voice and a safe space to express ourselves openly and comfortably. And one of the biggest things I learned from Khadija's Caravan, and just as a youth group administrator in Staten Island, is that a lot of times people fear things that they don't know, and out of that fear comes resentment. And in my heart, I think that that's the reason why a lot of my fellow Staten Island residents were scared of the community center getting built there, because they were scared of what they didn't know. They were never exposed to maybe a Muslim neighbor that they had, or they never knew that the person next door was a Muslim. So I don't really hold it against them, even though at that time it did feel really hurtful to not feel like you belong, especially if a person's been raised in that area for their whole life. And the most important thing I feel that Khadija's Caravan taught me was that it's important that we give our own story voices, and I think the most important story is the youth's stories, because a lot of times we get pushed under the rug, or no one really wants to hear our voice. And I guess that's what I learned the most, is that our voice is the most important, because it's our voices that are going to be honest, and we're not going to stop at anything to tell the truth.
Thank And so our next and final panelist, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Marjorie Dove Kent, representative of Jews Against Islamophobia, and also the director of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice.
Thanks very much. So first I'm just going to give a bit of information about Jews Against Islamophobia. Jews Against Islamophobia, or JAI, formed in September 2010 as a coalition of organizations and individuals committed to challenging anti-Muslim bigotry and anti-Arab racism in New York. We formed in immediate response to the Islamophobic opposition to the building of Park 51 Cordoba House, the proposed Lower Manhattan Mosque and Islamic Center. We formed for the purpose of making our voices heard and offering a Jewish voice that is part of the larger community efforts to challenge Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism in this city. And we're committed to challenging Jewish institutions and organizations that promote Islamophobia through their words or their actions. And we strive to be proactive in speaking out about the issues and making necessary connections. A little bit about the work that we've done, and I want to add that there's a lot of people in this room that are members of JAI who I encourage you to continue to speak with about these efforts. In 2010, Jews Against Islamophobia organized protest of the Simon Wiesenthal Center's Museum of Tolerance in New York, which opened that same year. The museum's official position was to foster tolerance and understanding through community involvement, educational outreach, and social action. But rather than being a Jewish voice for tolerance in the city, its leadership really had been a voice of intolerance. Rabbi Marvin Heyer, the Wiesenthal Center's founder and dean, and Rabbi Meyer May, its executive director, had both harshly criticized the Islamic Center's location in Lower Manhattan. And their statements really reinforce the Islamophobic notion that all Muslims are responsible for the 9/11 attacks. So the Simon Wiesenthal Center leadership had also violated international law and human rights principles. They had built another museum of tolerance on top of the Mamiya Cemetery in Jerusalem, which resulted in the desecration of a historic Muslim burial ground. So not exactly a museum of tolerance. So we wanted to make clear our opposition to the targeting of Muslim and Arab communities and to the use of Islamophobia as a means of shaping U.S. foreign policies and public opinions. We were successful in bringing hundreds of Jews out to demonstrate against the center, including several freedom riders who had been invited to be part of the center's events. Speaking out in that way is part of our commitment to holding our institutions accountable. In 2011, we were glad to accept the invitation of supporters from Afala Center in Bridgewater, New Jersey, to defend the Muslim community's right to build a community at public hearings and religious center and provide a media and strategy training with members of their group. These are just kind of two examples of the ways in which we strive to be an active Jewish voice in support of Muslim communities under attack and under attack of their human and civil rights. Since 2010, we've spoken out and taken action on a number of issues: racial profiling, police surveillance, and the NYPD's Islamophobic training materials and policies. And we have tried to consistently connect common struggles. For example, the NYPD surveillance of Muslim communities and activist organizations, and the stop and frisk policies that violate the rights of hundreds of thousands of Black and Latino men, and the physical repression of Occupy Wall Street. So as kind of connecting all these issues, joining in protests, spoken at rallies, and reached out to leaders and others within the Jewish community to join in the fight against Islamophobia and other forms of oppression in New York. Part of our community work is also providing resources and materials to Jewish leaders, rabbis of synagogues, and other Jewish community institutions, resources about Islamophobia, how they can educate their membership, talk to their membership about ways that they can be a stronger voice against Islamophobia here in New York. So the question comes up of why Jews against Islamophobia? Why do we organize around Islamophobia or against Islamophobia as Jews? So I believe that Islamophobia is a tool used by the larger, and let's name it Christian, right wing, to push forward policies promoting war, preventing immigration, and enabling white supremacy in the United States. The Jewish right wing is only a subset of that movement, but in New York they're a substantial subset. And we work as Jews against Islamophobia in New York because we want it to be known that those voices don't speak for us. There are thousands of Jews. There'll be a high leadership percentage in this room tonight. There are thousands of Jews who want to be partners in challenging Islamophobia, and we find it imperative to hold our community accountable for the ways that they participate in a right-wing nationalist agenda that ultimately serves very few. The wider right wing relies on the Jewish community to be a strong Islamophobic voice. And that's why we organize against Islamophobia as Jews. We demand that a different Jewish voice be heard. So what does this work look like right now? Well, today, many leaders within the New York Jewish community see the New York Muslim community as both a local and an international threat. There's a clear connection between Islamophobia here in New York and current right-wing Israel politics. Just a few weeks ago, the leadership of the New York Jewish Community Relations Council, the JCRC, made a blatant connection between the New York's Muslim community, terrorism, and the threat of war between Israel and Iran. Naturally. In a published letter, they offered great support for NYPD Commissioner Ray Kelly's leadership in claiming that he had made New York safe. And we as Jews against Islamophobia would like to question that term of safety. In this case, it's really pretty subjective. For us, safety is not reached when Commissioner Kelly and Mayor Bloomberg order NYPD officers to spy on Muslim communities, nor when NYPD officials use Islamophobic training materials and directives that foster suspicion and false stereotypes. We are currently in the process of publicly voicing our strong disagreement with the JCRC's leaders and their trivialization of the impact of constant surveillance upon the Muslim community. So what else? Where else can a strong Jewish voice against Islamophobia be meaningful and powerful? I believe we've gained many insights tonight of ways that we can be active. And it's up to us, I think, to think about how we as Jews can be a strong ally in the fight against Islamophobia and to take action. So I encourage you to join this coalition. Get in touch with JFridge, get in touch with JVP, get in touch with Jews Say No. Let us know that you want to be active in this fight. Check out the website, jewsagainstislamophobia.org. There's a lot of us here tonight. It really is standing room only, and I believe that together all our communities can be a very powerful force in this community. So. That's all. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.